Don't forget to subscribe to Basement Tales. Just go on Apple, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts and hit that subscribe button. We release a podcast every Thursday. That way you'll be sure not to miss an episode. Welcome to Basement Tales with Sam Jackman, Charlie Einsman, Ed Grass, and Sandra Delancey. We have fun telling crazy but true stories about turning the worst possible property disasters into bags of money. Along the way, we'll pass along some important lessons to help you make cash on real estate. Sam and Charlie walked away from cubicle hell 25 years ago. Starting with no property, they created their own Clear Sky group of companies, sold hundreds of houses, bought dozens of rentals, and made millions in hard money loans. I'm Ed, a big firm litigator until muscular dystrophy made me find a hobby other than suing people. I miss it. Sandra's the normal person here with a real job plus some rentals. Her decades of friendship with the group, from office flunkies to property gurus, might help keep us all humble and focused on learning something. I wouldn't count on it.
So our lunch with the people who are in a similar line of work, I call this particular person Charlie to the third power, because it's like Charlie, but three Charlies in one.
Oh, yeah.
I almost said that at the meeting, but I didn't know if he would take that badly.
Well, no, you know what? I couldn't believe he was wearing the same uniform Charlie wears. I mean, It's not that common.
I've never seen Charlie so animated when he was telling war stories about the money that he made.
Interfering with the date.
God.
Yeah.
Can we hear a story? Well, what happened? I don't know.
It's fun.
The stories are of interest to nobody but Charlie.
Right.
So, that's not true.
Well, not the war stories.
Well, it's not true, but they're too complicated. In other words, Charlie could speak in a finance shorthand with this gentleman, and they were talking back and forth like they were quants or something. I don't know, on the stock market, and just chortling with laughter. And I heard a lot of money being made, this and that, which that was enough for me. I was enjoying the hell out of it, but there was a lot of talk of deals and money making, and Charlie, for the first time I can remember, looked happy. He was just happy as could be.
Oh yeah, this guy, this is creative deal. This is creative deal making at its best.
There you go.
And we think on the hard money side that we try and be as creative as we can. This guy, he puts us to shame with some of this.
He's next level.
Well, in all seriousness, I was talking with Sam after we left the meeting. Well, as serious as we get, but the one thing I thought was he was talking about a deal. I won't give you all the details, but where somebody had a piece of property for $100,000, and he said, "Look, you don't want to mess with fixing this up. I'll buy it from you for $120,000, and then or I'll get a guy to buy it from you." So then he gets the other guy to buy it for $120 and says, "Look, when you're done developing this property, you pay me $200,000, and on the back end." So he owes back the $120,000 as a loan plus an extra $80,000 in profit. So I was saying to Sam, he easily could have said to the other guy, "I've got this great deal for you. You should pay $200,000 to me to get this piece of land." But instead, by setting it up with the other guy paying just $120,000 up front and the other $80,000 at back, the guy was so happy. He had the feeling of getting, so at $200,000 it was a great deal, totally fine deal. But the guy felt like it only cost $120,000, even though it ultimately cost him the full $200,000. So it was, and he said earlier in the discussion, it's how you make people feel. It's not just that you have a business deal. And here it was a win-win-win. The guy had property, he didn't know what to do with it. He made $20,000. And then this fellow who's telling the story, he made $80,000, and then the guy buying it for $200,000 developed it and made all sorts of grands. And so it's a win-win-win, but how he made everybody feel was fantastic. And that's how you get repeat customers. And it's such a good point, I think, in businesses. We had that great guest on who talked about the red carpet service with the Section 8 tenants and all that. It's not just the deal, which you can do, and people are happy, but you can make people ecstatic by how you structure it. So anyway, I guess I kind of knew that, but I really saw a great example of it where there was no dollar difference, but there was a happiness difference. And isn't that what we're all about, Sam?
I think so.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And this just happened to us the other day, in that we had a particular borrower who I knew exactly what her asset class type was and where she wanted to buy. So we're talking, this is in PG County, Maryland, and the deal goes like this. She bought a row home, a townhouse for 210. It needed $40,000 in renovation, and the out price was 310. Right, so she's in there for 250, our fees, her closing costs, buying costs, that kind of thing. So she's going to make about $30,000. Well, that was one of our deals that came that we did a hard money lender on. Well, just yesterday, I get a deal from a wholesaler in Oxon Hill, Maryland, which actually is like literally maybe 10 minutes from where she's doing this particular flip. So I sent her the deal from the wholesaler that I got it queued up on my email because I get so many deals from wholesalers. It was the same exact numbers. It was like a 210 buy. It was a semi-detached property in Oxon Hill, and the out price was about 310, and the renovation was around $40,000. I'm like, this is perfect for this person who just recently borrowed from us like about a couple weeks ago. So I send her the deal, and literally within an hour, she had it under contract with the wholesaler. And now we're getting ready to close this thing in 7 days or less. And so just by that, she was so happy with us. And she told me how great she felt. And, she hasn't flipped out of the other house that she purchased from us, but she's in the process. The work's going to be done next week and it'll be on the market. But she was so happy that we just, sent her this deal, just a bunch of email traffic. And now she's got another deal that she would have never had. And so that's pretty important as well.
And the margins for you or the team are maybe not good enough to make it worth the amount of effort you put in. But a flipper was happier with a smaller margin, or maybe doesn't have a ton of projects they're working on, and can pay the attention that you can't. So maybe you're the financer. I'm assuming you probably finance the thing.
Yeah, we're gonna finance it next week. Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's we were talking about this today too. That the real estate process, as I've watched you guys, if you look at from the birth to the death of a property, right? There's the raw land and the construction, and then the financing of that, and then marketing it through a broker and a listing agent, and the purchase and the title company and the sale, and then there's notes, and then there's distress notes, and then there's foreclosures, and then there's buying out. There's so many steps of the real estate process at which you can extract, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but at which you can extract a profit. So somebody who's a settlement attorney, they can that's all they do maybe, and they're extracting a profit from that phase to set the title insurance and do the closing and whatever. But what this guy reminded me of today is that anybody who's listening to, wherever they are in relation to a property, they may have a profit opportunity, and they may have more than one. So let's say somebody buys a piece of land that they want to develop, or that they think could be developed, and they get it under contract. Well, they could just go right ahead and do the fix and flip themselves. But maybe they don't know that much about contracting, so maybe they get a good deal and they sell the deal to somebody else wholesale, so the other person will do the construction work. Or maybe that person has a note now on this fix and flip property, and they sell it to somebody else, but they keep the financing. So the other person is doing the work and paying them. Maybe they've got the hard money loan at 12%, and they sell the opportunity. It's all financed and ready to go, and they charge 15% interest. I mean, there's every place where you can make deals with these things, and it may be that whoever's listening here, their particular place in the real estate process to make the money may be different or than they realize. And so you can, like Sam and Charlie, you can become a real estate broker, learn how real estate works, a real estate agent, and then start looking anywhere in that process to make money. And of course, Charlie now is focused so much on the hard money side. because he can assess that whole life cycle and how is this deal likely to flow and work out, and he doesn't have to do the work. He doesn't, if he's not doing the flip. Usually Sam would be the guy managing all of that, but there's only so many hours in the day for Sam to manage that. The great thing about the hard money is somebody else does the work. And they're making profit, and that's great. You don't have to make profit at every point of the real estate deal.
That's a good point, Ed. I mean, you don't have to, kind of come into these deals as I guess a purchaser. You don't have to be, an investor with a whole bunch of money. There are a lot of places to make money. But for somebody like me who's looking to just kind of come in and either I guess buy and flip or fix and flip, maybe buy and hold. How do I get in? Have we talked about, how do you kind of get into that market? Like, what's the best way? I don't know that we've ever talked about that. Like, tell folks how to get into, fixing and flipping and buying and holding. Like, where are the properties? How do I find something right now? Like, I always talk about grandma's property. Let's say my grandmother left me a property and I want to fix it and flip it, or buy and hold. What are some strategies that you guys would recommend for doing that?
Well, that's the toughest part right now because of the foreclosure moratorium. But there are just so many different ways to find properties and get in the game. And just like this one example I shared with you guys earlier, that property came from a wholesaler. So for you guys out there, one of the things that you do is you want to meet as many wholesalers as possible and get on their lists, because these wholesalers are mailing out to cash buyers. Just tell them you're a cash buyer and then get on their lists. So like in our area, DC, Maryland, Virginia, I'm probably on, I'm not kidding, 50 different wholesaler lists. All right, so that's strategy number one. Now, the problem with that strategy is that a lot of these bigger wholesalers have lists of thousands and thousands of people, so you don't want to really compete in that space. That's kind of a bad space to begin with. But if you meet enough wholesalers, and if they like you, you'll just become their exclusive buyer. So that's strategy number one. Strategy number two is this thing called the hidden market.
Knock.
Yeah.
Knock on doors.
Yeah, which is probably the best way to do it. And so the hidden market is basically driving for dollars. So you drive for dollars, you look for vacant houses, you look for blighted houses. You just look for anything that looks in some sort of distress.
You talk to the neighbors on both sides of any blighted house. That's an excellent way.
Yep. You then talk to the neighbors, you find out what's going on with the house. You add these houses to your list, right? So you're creating your own unique hidden market list. Now, once you have your hidden market list created, you're going to have to do some research to figure out where the owner's located, especially if the property is vacant. If the property is just blighted or dilapidated, then odds are maybe the owner's living there, or it could be a renter, and they could have an out-of-town mailer. So then what you do is, once you've got your hidden market list built, what we do is through Sam, we basically triangulate the people on that list and we continuously market to them. And so triangulation basically means you do one of three things. You either you send them a mailer to their address of where they're staying. You just send a postcard or a yellow letter or something like that, but you've got to consistently do it. You do a text list or a telephone campaign. That's the second leg of the stool. And the third leg of the stool is you do an email campaign. Remember, you have to go and get this data of the homeowner, and sometimes that could be challenging. And there's a couple free websites you can go to get that data. You can pay for it through a skip trace or another way to pull the source, pay a paid source person, so you can find all that stuff. And so that's the second way of finding properties. The third way, and actually the best way to do it, is just through the distressed asset process. And so the distressed asset process is your foreclosures, your pre-foreclosures, your short sales. Now, the problem with the third process is that because of the foreclosure moratorium, that thing has been non-existent for the last year and a half. But hopefully June 30th, the foreclosure moratorium will exit, and then we'll hopefully start getting back to a little bit more marketable kinds of properties within the distressed asset space is what we're thinking might happen, but we're not exactly sure. But those are the three ways to sort of find properties within the space if you're just beginning.
Okay, so now I have a property and I know that you guys have like some resources that you use to do your own like fixing. You have your own contractors, but how does someone get into that? And is the market kind of swamped right now, or can I find folks to help me fix up? I know there are certain I guess areas of employment that are saturated. You can't find people to do certain types of work. Is this one of them? Can I find someone to fix up a house right now in this market?
Sorry, I'll speak to that. So Charlie and I were just talking earlier today about a guy who had what he thought was a great business idea, and that was a model whereby he would gather up a whole bunch of referral resources for contractors, and then if you needed a contractor, you'd go online and you'd get yourself a resource. Now, people have done this with Angie's List, with all these different lists before, and a lot of people probably aren't aware of the hit rate on finding a qualified contractor to resolve even small problems at their home. It's very low, right? So we were just talking, we've had way over 100 contractors, and there could not be more than 5 people that I could name that I would rely on to do something within the first 1.5 times, right? Not even the first time, but just the first 1.5 times, at general rate. It's very hard to find a good contractor. And then once you have found a good contractor, usually they're captive to their existing client base, because they're going to go repeatedly to the same homes. If they're a narrow contractor, like an HVAC contractor, whoever you call, well, unless you're calling an expensive generalist who's just going to send whoever's on a truck to your house, they're going to only have a certain set of clients. And the same goes for a general contractor. He's only going to work for a certain number of people and a certain number of builders. And it goes on like that. So it's very hard to disrupt that and get yourself a good contractor. So
I have no doubt, Sam. You're pretty mild-mannered. I have no doubt you would mud wrestle another human to death and put their face in the mud until they asphyxiate if they took one of your contractors.
Yeah. You do get a lot of that. People want to poach your contractors, but not to worry. You don't have. They're self-protecting, because if you're paying them in a timely manner and you communicate clearly with them, they're not going to go anywhere else. You don't have to hold them. They don't want to deal with anybody else, because a lot of people, as it turns out, don't pay their bills. So these contractors get out to houses, they do the work, and then they don't get paid. And there's nothing more troublesome, because their margins aren't that high. So they've provided materials, they've done all this work, and then they don't get money, and they got to feed their family. So if they're getting paid steadily from you and you're not demanding them to do things that were outside your original scope of work, then they're going to stick with you. So it's tough. And in this market, there is no inexpensive labor. A lot of people don't want to go to work, and it is hard to find people to do things.
What do you think about like Nextdoor? And I see a lot of stuff on that. Is there any decent referrals like that, do you think, or is it just hit or miss?
I'd say that I would say there's not any decent referrals like that.
Yeah.
Unless you need your toilet fixed or something. But if you need to remodel a house, there's no decent referrals.
What are we saying, Sam? How do I get someone to, fix my house?
You need to talk to other people in the industry and see who they're using, and then have them call the contractor and say, hey, you're going to get a call from Sandra. And then Sandra calls, and then they'll answer your phone call. Because if you call a decent contractor without a warm, they won't even call you back. And then you're like, oh, they couldn't be a good contractor. But it turns out they don't have any time for any new business.
Right.
We had
sounds like a good entry point then to get into this business.
We had a property outside of our normal scope of area in Charles County that we're looking at, and I just needed to get an asphalt contractor. I don't know how many people I called, and people who said they might know someone, and I called, they not one call back. So I called one guy who's worked with us in Virginia. I said, look, if you go out to our Maryland site, I'll give you another project in Virginia the same week. And he said, okay. And he went on out there.
Well, I was hard. Going back to Sandra's initial question which went to Charlie about the hidden market. What I heard actually was 2 different things. I heard for people like me who don't like to interact with other human beings, there's the foreclosure lists and gathering the data. But but the knocking on doors, which was sort of Sam's reaction, is the personal relationship thing and knowing your neighborhood. And it's the same with the contractors. And I tend to be the nerdier, not wanting to talk to people. I want to just see the data and see the list of people and whatever. But the reality is, and why somebody like Sam and Charlie too are so valuable, is they actually like to talk to people and develop relationships and get to know them. And that's if you don't, if you're not a data person and you can go out and make those relationships and meet the people, and look what happened. You know, Charlie knew somebody who had executed. He sent her a deal, not because he couldn't have sent it to 20 other people, but you become reliable. So like Charlie, I mean, like Sam said, for the contractor, if he makes that introduction and says, hey, Sandra's going to pay her bills. Sandra's a nice person. Sandra's easy to work with. You know, whatever you say in that nice, friendly conversation, that person's going to feel good, because if Sandra ends up not doing those things, that contractor is going to be mad at Sam. So he's not going to say that unless it's true. And if it doesn't work out, Sam probably would help make it right. You know, because the contractor knows he's not going to leave him out to dry. So very unfortunately for people like me, it's these personal relationships and developing friendship. And so some of the stuff, like Charlie said, going to these big meetups and things, you're probably not going to immediately get some great deal out of that somebody else isn't going to score first. But you might start to hear some story. Oh, so-and-so has a great contracting company, or so-and-so completely hosed me on a fix and flip. Stay away
that's
from
important.
such and so.
That's important.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not as good as a good recommendation, but a bad recommendation to tell you to stay away, in other words, is
Shark Tank. That's the Shark Tank.
What about something like tax sales? Is that a good place?
Well, I would encourage people to look that stuff in terms of finding the properties. That's much more of a nerdy numbers game. And
that's where Ed lives.
That's where I fit.
That.
Yeah, there's giant lists of thousands of properties, many of which are absolute hand grenades of hell. and there's some lovely things sprinkled throughout, and that has a long learning curve. But it is similar if you go to some of these sales to watch them happen. First, you have to invest time. You know, you have to read the statute, and regular people can read some of these statutes. Are not that complicated. You can sort of get a feel for it. You can go and watch what happens. You can try to talk to people. People try to talk to me, but I'm not very nice. But there are other people who will talk nicely at these things. And so it's a long-term process to make that happen. And that's why it has a good, you know, gets into the theory stuff. Sometimes these things with really good returns have good returns because it's hard to get into them. There's a fairly good sized learning curve about tax liens. So there's only so many people that do it, that have, not that a lot of people couldn't do it, but they're not going to spend
hours
and
days.
Days.
You know, we went and watched them for several days before engaging in them. I mean, it's a whole process to understand the nuances of it. And then once you go through it once, then you have it a million times better. But those are all long haul plays to get assets, to get either tax liens or get homes. And they're great. The longer the haul, the bigger the barriers, the more knocking you have to do, the higher your yield is going to be. Now, you don't want to do all that work and accept a low return. You just got to walk away from low return deals.
Yeah, and another good strategy that you brought up, Sandra, is especially in Montgomery County, PG County, Charles County, Frederick County, and DC, they publish these lists of people that are behind on their property taxes. So, you know, there's no reason why you can't take that list and market to that list exclusively.
Right.
You know, send them the mailer, figure out their email addresses, figure out their phone numbers, and triangulate them. And that could be a good starting point of your so-called hidden market list.
It's going to be so hard to stand out, Charlie, though. I can't tell you how many of those emails, phone calls that I get, and you probably get them as well. We all get them about our selling our homes. So.
Right. The problem, though, with doing it that way is that everybody has access to that list.
Right.
And so, like, if you get the tax lien lists, or you buy, a bunch of out of town owners from List Source or these other, list sellers, everybody's buying those lists. Everybody's marketing to them. That's why the most powerful method is, like Sam said, the driving for dollars methodology, creating your own list that's exclusive to you, because you've got to create the list that's a separator from all your competition. Because with the advent of hard money lenders and cash buyers, anybody can get money. Money is easy to get. The hardest part is finding these properties. And because money is easy to get, it's absolutely saturated this market of bird dogs. And so everybody's looking at the same stuff. So by you creating your own hidden market, that's a list exclusive to you, and that will hopefully separate yourself from your competition.
Well, and you can do a hybrid approach too, right? So let's say tax lien is a perfect example. They're all different counties, or not every state does them, but say Maryland, every county in Maryland does tax liens pretty much. Virginia really doesn't. DC has the list, right? Well, let's say you live in DC and you get the DC tax lien list. Well, maybe you look through that and you can identify the properties in an area that you know. Like you as hell, I know that place. I know what those places are worth, what they cost to fix them up. So I'm going to go personally talk to those people, right? Because you get the people who buy the list and they send them letters, and you're one of like 900 letters. But if you're willing to actually walk and try to make the personal relationship, maybe use some of that data, or maybe somebody who lives in that neighborhood. You live in D.C., but it's a different ward, and you can partner with somebody who is in the community, who's a
we
trusted
met with someone
person.
who had lived on 14th and U, and she walked around and got 20 wholesale deals in her neighborhood in the last 2 years.
Wow.
Now, she didn't buy any herself, and I didn't get into all those details. So why wouldn't you if they were good deals? But maybe she wasn't quite ready. But 20 wholesale deals, I was like, even if she's lying, half that number is still a good number. I mean, that's good.
Is there nothing wrong though? I mean, is there nothing legally wrong about, soliciting folks who are in trouble, financially? They're behind on taxes and you're calling them up, or, is there any issue around that, Ed?
Well, most of the data is public, and this is a warning, as always, check your jurisdiction. This is not advice. This is general educational stuff. Most information...
And come on, keep going. And you are a lawyer, and keep going.
Yeah, all right. Well, I keep saying it I can't say it every time. All right, I am a lawyer, and I'm no longer Charlie's lawyer. I'm quitting. But I'm also nobody else's lawyer who's listening. And I'm retired. But in any event, so I may be totally wrong. But generally speaking, most of the information is public about. You can go and look up in person, or typically online, not always, what deeds are out there on a particular property, like what loan is outstanding, and you can figure out what loans have been satisfied and when.
But is Sandra asking? Is she asking if it's illegal to solicit? Can you
Yeah.
approach someone in financial distress
Yeah.
in
Right.
Maryland?
Yeah.
Right, and that's what isn't there an issue in Maryland, Charlie, with some of that?
There is.
And how does that play
In
into tax
Maryland?
liens?
No.
Yeah, so I don't know how that plays into tax liens. I know how it plays into foreclosures. So on the pre-foreclosure side, you can't target somebody that you know is in financial distress. What you have to do is you have to go to every house on that block, or, let's say you're targeting one house, maybe go 3 neighbors left, 3 neighbors right, across the street, 6, 7 houses. You can't just target that house in its own. You have to cover some semblance of houses. You can't just go to that one house. You got to get caught doing it, but
I don't get that. So does it matter how you found out that this person is in distress? Is that really what this is about? How you found out that they're in distress? Or
well, through the pre-foreclosures and the tax liens, they're in financial distress.
what if I found out, because we all know in the neighborhood that this person is, getting behind, and is it not the same, right?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Not the same.
Okay.
I'm assuming it hasn't been published, so.
Okay.
You've mentioned this before, Charlie. I'll have to look up this law. I'm curious because I had not heard of it before you mentioned it, but it makes sense. I mean, this is what's so hard about the law. Jurisdictions do all sorts of different things, And frankly, it's usually for a good reason. I mean, you don't want people getting harassed and browbeaten and whatever because they have a financial trouble, right? So
Right.
that's understandable. On the other hand, then maybe the downside is they're actually not getting information about a way to get out of their trouble that really might be good for them. They might have no idea that their place can be sold. And like Charlie said, it's probably more the targeting aspect would be
Yeah.
my guess,
Right.
because the information itself is clearly public. It's then how you use the information.
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah.
definitely the predatory targeting information that's
Mm-hmm.
going on, because what happened was, I got another funny story. Uh, a few years ago, we were doing a presentation for Think Realty on how to find distressed assets. And so one of the modules was pre-foreclosures. And so I was showing them through, you go through the newspaper, you look at trustee sale ads, and you determine which house has equity. And then once you determine which house has equity, you literally go to that house and put a brochure on it and do some door knocking. Well, I was presenting this in Maryland in front of a predominantly Maryland audience. I would say 70% Maryland and maybe 30% DC and Virginia. And so when I started talking about this and how I go to the houses in Virginia, of course, and I put our brochure, and of course I've shown them a sample of the brochure, these guys got absolutely animated. They were like, "Oh, hell no, you can't do this in Maryland. There's predatory laws, and you can get it."
Foreclosure shark is what.
Yeah, yeah. And so they really gave me
Mm-hmm.
the fifth degree on that. And so that's sort of how we sort of learned about it. And so I sort of had to backtrack a little bit and make
So
sure
it's
that they knew I was
clear
doing
you
that in Virginia
it's clear you can't do it with the mortgages. It's questionable
Yeah.
whether you can do it with
the
people who
taxes.
have tax liens,
Yeah.
and that's an interesting question that we'd have to explore.
Might look at. So to summarize, I think I can summarize this really, really well, which is get all the information you can publicly and then talk to people very personally unless you can't. Do
Right.
not do it if you can't as a matter of law. But yeah, so know a lawyer and be friendly, and maybe they'll warn you. Just actually, well, look at that. Charlie was warned by people who are in the industry, and he learned something, which he then taught me, and hopefully we've put out there. But generally, you can't go wrong with getting to know people personally. And if you know your neighborhood, that's probably a good place to start.
Right. Right.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's been another Basement Tales. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It'll make Sam happy.
Like
And
us.
Sam, I like you, but you mean you want other people to like you.
Yeah.
All right.
And also, please send us an email. Your story at basementtales.com has two T's in it again. Your story at basementtales.com. It doesn't have to be your story. It could be comments, concerns, questions, maybe something that we'll answer for you in the future. So please feel free to do it. We're here for you. All right. Thanks. I don't hear anybody.
I can hear Charlie. I can hear Ed.
I don't hear Sandra. Do you hear me?
Hey, Charlie, can you hear?
Does anybody hear
Can
me?
you hear this?
I see that.
I